Before you decide that calling a husband a doormat makes a woman cruel, answer one question. If a man spends years avoiding every hard conversation, doing whatever keeps the room quiet, and letting his wife make every visible decision, is she wrong for naming what everyone can see? I did not insult Julian at Nolan's housewarming. I turned a private pattern into one honest joke, and our friends laughed because honesty often sounds funny before people admit it is true. Julian only pressed his thumb along the edge of his watch strap, held out his hand, and asked me to prove it for 30 days. I shook his hand while he pointed one serious finger toward my face, because I knew exactly which one of us would ask the other to come home first. At 37, I was Cassidy Vale, Public Information Director for the Regional Transit Authority. My job was to tell 40,000 commuters that a closed bridge was an improvement in progress and make them believe I respected their time. Of course, wording mattered. Wording decided whether a room heard a delay, a promise, or an excuse. Julian used to say I could make a fire alarm sound like an invitation. He meant it as praise. Mostly. We had been together 11 years and married 8. He worked in continuity planning for the county health system, which meant he prepared hospitals for storms, power failures, computer outages, and other problems nobody wanted to imagine during lunch. He liked plans that prevented panic. I liked language that controlled it. For years, that made us a good team. Every Sunday morning, Julian made coffee and opened the narrow notebook where we kept the week. Dentist appointments. My mother's prescriptions, dinner with friends. Which car needed fuel? He used a blue pen for his tasks and a green one for mine. Then he put the notebook beside my cup and asked what he had missed. Back then, it felt like care. Later, it felt like living with a very polite operations department. That was my one fair complaint about Julian. He could organize anything except a difficult feeling. If I said I was lonely, he checked our calendar for a free evening. If I said he had gone quiet, he asked what exact conversation I wanted. When my voice rose, his became softer until I sounded like the only unreasonable person in the house. He never shouted. He also rarely stayed inside a feeling long enough to be changed by it. 2 things can be true. People forget that when they pick sides. My father left when I was 12. No long argument. No warning, I understood. One Monday, his shoes were beside the door, and on Tuesday, my mother said he needed space. I learned early that the person who needs less can leave first. Julian knew that story. He knew why stability mattered to me. He also knew I hated being treated like a frightened child because of it, so we did not discuss it often. That spring, he started studying a folded coastal transit map at the breakfast table. It showed a city 300 miles east, all bridges and blue water. He would trace one route, press his thumb along his watch strap, then fold the map into a neat square. I asked whether the county had invented another disaster for him to plan. He said the health system was discussing a regional program and wanted his opinion. What he meant was exactly what he said. What I heard was Julian finding another project that did not require emotion. I told him to enjoy his coloured routes. He asked if I wanted to hear why the city mattered. I said I already spent my day looking at maps. He folded it away. Of course, the silence after that was his choice. 3 days later, Nolan Brooks sent our friend group an invitation to his housewarming. Nolan had bought a renovated brick bungalow after his divorce and wanted everyone to admire the fact that he had survived both the marriage and the mortgage. He promised food, a fire pit, and one of his prediction games. Nolan loved turning people into teams. At birthdays, he brought cards asking who would be rich first, who would get arrested first, and who would survive longest on an island. He kept red poker chips in a wooden box and made everyone place a chip beside a name. Harmless nonsense. 1 chip. 1 laugh. Nothing a marriage could not survive. My college friend Paige called the next morning to ask what I planned to wear. Paige had ended a 5-year relationship 6 months earlier and now treated independence like a medical treatment everyone needed. She said Nolan's parties were good for remembering that couples were not one organism. I told her Julian and I had never had that problem. Then I looked at the blue and green notebook beside my coffee. Julian had already filled in the address. Nolan's requested arrival time and a note to bring ice. I laughed and told Paige that my husband might disagree. That was the first time I used the word doormat about him. Not to his face. Not yet. Paige laughed hard enough to cough. She asked whether Julian knew I saw him that way. I said Julian knew I loved him. I also said he would apologize to a chair after bumping into it. Paige said that was not a husband. That was premium customer service. The joke stayed with me because it fit too easily. Over the next 2 weeks, I started seeing proof everywhere. At a restaurant, the server gave us the wrong table. Julian accepted the replacement near the kitchen because he did not want to make the young woman nervous. I asked for the window table we had reserved and got it in 4 minutes. At my mother's apartment, she complained that her bathroom shelf leaned. Julian repaired it before finishing his tea. She thanked me for bringing him. At home, our neighbor asked whether Julian could look at a broken gate. He went outside in slippers and fixed the hinge. Useful, kind, available. Also easy. When I mentioned this to Paige, she told me calm men were wonderful until a woman needed to know whether they had a spine. She said her former boyfriend had agreed with everything until the day he packed without warning. That should have made me cautious. Instead, I heard the difference between him and Julian. Julian would never pack without warning. He made lists before buying toothpaste. At work, I was preparing a public meeting about a month of weekend rail closures. The executive team wanted a message that sounded firm without sounding cold. I built the presentation, rewrote the notices, and practiced answers until nobody could corner me with a question I had not already shaped. Julian usually reviewed my access plan before major events. He checked ramps, backup power, emergency exits, and the dull details my communications staff treated as someone else's problem. That week, he left the printed plan untouched on the dining table. I asked if he had forgotten. He said I had told him I wanted less management at home. What he meant was that he had heard me. What I heard was a small sulk dressed as respect. I told him not to be childish. He pressed his thumb along his watch strap and asked whether I wanted his help or wanted him to guess when help was insulting. There it was again. A question instead of an answer. I said a husband should know the difference. He nodded once and left the plan where it was. I reviewed it myself. Mostly. The public meeting happened at St. Avery Medical Center because its auditorium sat beside the affected rail line. Before the doors opened, a woman in a charcoal suit crossed the lobby and greeted Julian. I knew Dr. Amina Rao by reputation. She ran operations for 3 hospitals and could make senior managers stand straighter by entering a room. She called him Director Vale and asked whether he had decided about the Eastern region. Julian glanced toward me before answering. He said the timing was still being settled. I smiled and told Amina that people at hospitals gave everyone impressive titles during emergencies. She did not laugh. Julian did not correct me. Of course, he was a planner, not a director. Amina was being polite because she wanted more work from him. That explanation fit the man I knew, so I kept it. The meeting began 20 minutes later. Halfway through my presentation, an elderly man asked why the temporary shuttle stop had no bench and no covered path from the clinic entrance. I had an answer about traffic flow. He wanted a place for his wife to sit. Julian spoke to the facility manager after the session. By morning, there were 6 chairs under a temporary canopy. My director praised the transit authority for responding quickly. I accepted the praise because the notice had gone out under my name. At home that night, Julian asked why I had laughed when Amina called him director. I told him I had not laughed at him. I had lightened an awkward moment. He named the restaurant table, my mother's shelf, the neighbor's gate, and the untouched access plan. He said I had started describing his choices as if they proved he could not make one, specific and factual. That was Julian's safest language. I told him kindness was not the problem. His lack of force was. I said sometimes I wanted to feel married to a man, not supported by a system. His hand moved to the watch strap, then stopped. He asked whether I still wanted to be married to him. The question irritated me because it was too large for the complaint. I said only a weak man would turn feedback into a threat against the marriage. He said he had not threatened anything. he had asked. I shut down the conversation by opening my laptop. The weekend closure notices needed one more revision, and unlike feelings, copy improved when someone worked on it. Paige visited the next evening. She brought wine and found the coastal map on the sideboard. She asked whether Julian was planning an escape. I said my husband needed written instructions to escape a fire drill. We laughed. Julian came downstairs while Paige still held the map. He took it gently, folded it along the old lines, and placed it inside his work bag. Paige asked whether she had touched a state secret. He said it was only a route he might need. His voice was calm. Paige's smile became smaller. After he left, she said perhaps we should stop joking when he was close enough to hear. That was the first change in her. Small. Almost nothing. I told her Julian knew we were teasing. Paige refilled her glass but did not add another joke. Nolan's housewarming arrived on the last Saturday in April. His backyard looked designed for photographs. String lights crossed above a stone patio. New cedar chairs formed a loose circle around a black fire bowl. Music came through hidden speakers, and the air smelled like cut grass and smoke from the grill. 12 friends came. Paige, Tessa and her husband, Omar, Nolan's sister, Lacey, 2 couples from our old neighborhood, a few people from Nolan's running club. Julian carried 3 bags of ice through the side gate and helped Nolan fix a burner that would not stay lit. Nolan called him the most useful guest in the city. I said usefulness was Julian's love language. Somebody laughed. Julian looked at me, then at the burner. His thumb moved along the edge of his watch strap. I knew that gesture. He used it when he did not want conflict. The evening stayed pleasant for 2 hours. We ate. We drank. Nolan showed everyone the renovations and mentioned the cost often enough that we could have reconstructed his loan documents. After dark, he brought out the wooden box of red chips. The prediction game began with safe questions. Who would retire first? Who would move abroad? Who would survive a week without a phone? Then Nolan asked which couple in the circle was least likely to separate. Most chips moved toward Julian and me. I liked that. Of course I did. Public confidence feels warmer than private routine. Tessa said we were steady. Omar said Julian had the patience of a saint. Nolan grinned and asked whether patience was the secret or whether I simply ran a strict house. The group laughed. Paige said Cassidy did not run the house. Cassidy ran Julian. Her tone was lighter than her face. Julian sat across the fire from me. The orange light cut across his cheek. He did not smile. Nolan asked if the joke was true. I could have ended it there. Instead, I wanted the room to see what I believed I had built. A marriage so secure that even disrespect could not shake it. I said Julian was a wonderful husband, but he was also a doormat with a calendar. The first laugh came from Nolan. 2 others followed. Then the sound thinned. Julian kept looking at me. I added that he would never have the guts to leave me. He knew his life would become harder the minute I was gone. Paige lowered her glass. Tessa looked toward Omar. Nolan leaned forward because Nolan always leaned toward a spark. Julian stood. No rush. No anger. He walked around the fire bowl until he stood directly in front of me, close enough that I could see the fine grey at his temples, close enough that the circle went quiet without anyone asking. His thumb pressed once along the watch strap. Then he held out his right hand. He asked whether I wanted to find out. I laughed because the question sounded like Julian attempting theatre. He did not pull his hand back. Nolan asked what he meant. Julian kept his eyes on me. He proposed 30 days apart. No calls except a medical emergency. No favours. No shared calendar. No asking friends to carry messages. The first person who asked for help or asked the other to come home would admit the truth in front of the same group. I asked what truth. He said that if he came back first, he would admit he had mistaken dependence for love. If I called first, I would tell everyone he had never been my doormat. The circle changed around us. Chairs stopped moving. Someone set down a bottle. I was still smiling. 30 days without Julian sounded inconvenient, not dangerous. I managed public crises for a living. He made coffee and remembered filters. I put my hand in his. His grip was steady. With his free hand, he raised one finger between us and pointed near my face, not touching me, making sure I listened. He repeated the rule about friends. No messengers. No quiet rescue through the group. I told him he was making the rules because rules were the only form of courage he understood. Then I shook his hand once. Nolan took a red chip from the box and placed it on the arm of my chair. He had written stay on one side and go on the other with black marker. Julian turned it over so go faced up. I read that as drama. A quiet man's version of throwing a glass. Paige did not laugh this time. Julian released my hand and asked Nolan for a pen. He wrote May 31st on the edge of a paper napkin, then folded it beneath the chip. 30 days exactly. I told the group they should remember this moment because Julian would be back before my laundry basket filled. Nolan recovered first. He lifted his drink and called it the most expensive prediction game he had ever hosted. The laughter returned, but not evenly. Julian collected his work bag from the hall. Tessa asked if he was leaving already. He said the test had started when I shook his hand. At the gate, he looked back once. His expression was not wounded. It was settled. Of course, settled was easy when a man expected to sleep in his own bed by Monday. He did not come home Monday. The first morning, I made coffee too strong and poured half of it away. The notebook sat beside the machine, open to a blank week. I closed it because using Julian's system felt like letting him help. By noon, I had ordered groceries, moved a dentist appointment, and called a plumber about the slow drain upstairs. Competence was not a male trait. I sent Paige a photograph of the grocery bags and told her the doormat had officially failed to collapse. She answered with a thumbs up 2 hours later. No joke. No call. On day 3, my mother asked why Julian had not brought her prescription organizer. I told her about the bet because hiding it would make it sound worse. She asked why any grown woman would wager her marriage at a housewarming. I said she was missing the point. She said the point appeared to be that I enjoyed making a patient man perform patience. I ended the call before she could turn Julian into a saint. That afternoon, the plumber charged an emergency fee for a drain Julian had cleaned twice a year. On Thursday, I missed the recycling window. Friday brought a parking notice because Julian had renewed the residential permit under his own calendar, not mine. 3 fees. 4 bags by the garage. Nothing serious. I could pay for inconvenience. What annoyed me was the friend group. Nolan posted photographs from the party, but none showed the handshake. Tessa started a dinner thread and addressed the invitation to each person separately. Paige answered my messages late. Omar asked in the group whether Julian was doing well, then removed the question before anyone responded. I told myself they were afraid of taking sides. People mistake silence for judgment when they are insecure. I was not insecure. At work, the weekend closure entered its second phase. A shuttle driver took the wrong turn near St. Avery, and 2 passengers missed clinic appointments. Julian normally kept the hospital contact tree current. I had assumed the spreadsheet belonged to the transit team. It did not. Amina answered my call and said Julian had transferred responsibility the week before. Her voice stayed professional. She gave me a new contact and asked whether I had reviewed the continuity packet he left. I said Julian loved packets. She paused, then said that was one way to describe a man who prevented small failures from becoming public ones. I fixed the shuttle route in 40 minutes. My director asked why the correction had taken 40 minutes. That evening, I opened the hall closet looking for the spare printer cable. Julian's navy coat was gone. So were his hiking boots, the old duffel, and the small toolbox he kept on the upper shelf. The empty space was too clean. For a few seconds, I stood with one hand on the door and saw the shape of an answer I did not like. Julian had not packed for a month. He had packed what mattered. Then I saw the cardboard archive boxes stacked near the garage entrance. Temporary storage, obviously. He wanted the house to look emptier so I would call. I closed the closet. If he wanted theatre, He could perform it without an audience. On day 9, Dr. Amina Rao arrived in a silver SUV. Julian was with her. They opened the garage and began loading the archive boxes. I stepped onto the porch and reminded Julian that direct contact broke the rules. He said he was not asking for help and would be gone in 10 minutes. Amina nodded to me. She carried one box marked regional readiness and another marked Easton cast. I asked why a senior hospital executive had become his moving service. Amina said the files belonged where the work was going. Julian pressed his thumb along his watch strap. He asked whether I wanted to discuss us before the last week of the test. That was not an apology. It was a procedural offer. I told him the test ended on May 31st, not whenever his boxes made him uncomfortable. He said the boxes did not make him uncomfortable. Of course they did not. Boxes never asked him how he felt. Amina looked from him to me, then carried the last one to the SUV. Julian left without entering the house. Day 12 was my father's birthday. I had not spoken to him in 6 years, but the date still made me count exits. 1 father. 1 husband. 2 men who believed leaving could be explained later. That was when Julian's flaw mattered most. He had turned our pain into a schedule. He had taken a cruel joke and built a controlled experiment around it because control was where he hid. If he truly loved me, he could have refused the game. He could have stayed and fought. Instead, he had made silence into a weapon and called it a boundary. That accusation was fair. I held on to it. I changed tactics on day 14. I sent one neutral message through the shared home app about a water meter inspection. No emotion. No rescue. Julian answered with the access code and nothing else. I wrote that he could come by if he wanted to discuss the house. He reminded me that I had rejected the discussion on the porch. I said I was offering a practical compromise. He said practical was not the same as honest. The exchange ended there. My compromise had not brought him closer. It had given him another reason to stay away. By the 3rd week, I had learned every task Julian performed without announcing it. He checked my mother's smoke alarm. He renewed the car tags. He kept Nolan from borrowing tools he never returned. He sent Tessa a message on the anniversary of her brother's death. He reminded me which board member needed large print before meetings. None of those things made him powerful. They made him busy. That was what I told myself as my life became louder. The lawn service came on the wrong day. My mother stopped calling after I told her to ask Julian directly if she missed him. Paige cancelled lunch because she had plans she did not describe. At work, my director removed me from the next hospital coordination call and asked Amina to lead it. I still had the house, my salary, my name on the transit notices. Julian had a furnished rental somewhere and several boxes of disaster plans. If anyone was thriving, it was not obvious. On day 22, Nolan invited the group to a minor league baseball game. I answered first and bought 2 seats, one for me and one for Paige. Paige said she was working. At the stadium, I found her 3 rows down beside Tessa and Omar. There was an empty seat next to them, not reserved for me. I asked Paige later why she had lied. She said she had not wanted to spend 3 hours discussing the bet. I told her she had encouraged the joke. She said encouraging a joke was not the same as wanting a marriage to end. I asked whether she believed Julian would leave. Her answer took too long. Then she said the question was why I needed him not to. I ended the call. 1 friend. 2 empty seats. No loyalty. The next morning, I found the red poker chip in my coat pocket. Go faced up. Nolan must have slipped it there after the party. I turned it to Stee and set it beside the blank notebook. May 31st was 9 days away. I decided the end needed witnesses. Julian had created the rules in public. I would make him accept the result in the same way. Not because I needed applause, because clarity deserved a room. I booked the private dining hall in the old rail depot, a restored station the transit authority rented for community events. High windows, long tables, brass clocks that no longer kept time. I called it the results dinner. The invitation went to everyone who had been around Nolan's fire pit. I wrote that the 30-day doormat test would end at 8 o'clock and that nobody should miss Julian admitting which life was harder. Nolan answered with a laughing face, then deleted it. Tessa said she would come. Omar followed. Lacey accepted. Paige left the message unread. Julian responded last. He asked whether I wanted every person who heard the original joke in the room. I said yes. I wanted no private reinterpretation later. He asked whether I was willing to end the test before the dinner and speak to him alone. That was his final offer. Clean. Private. Too late. I told him he had spent 26 days using silence to punish me and now wanted privacy because he was losing. He said silence had been part of the agreement I shook on. I said his emotional absence started years before Nolan's patio. I said he had made me beg for visible feeling, then blamed me when I stopped respecting the quiet things he offered instead. He did not refute it. He said I was right that he had hidden inside usefulness. He said planning for everyone had let him avoid asking whether anyone knew him. For 1 second, that answer opened a smaller door. We could have spoken like two people instead of opponents. Then he asked whether being right about that was enough for me to cancel the dinner. I looked at the invitation list. 11 acceptances. The same room that had heard me called cruel would watch him return. I told him no. He pressed his thumb along the watch strap. Even through the video call, I saw it. Nervous. Finally. He said he would bring the people who needed to hear the result. I thanked him and ended the call first. The following day, my director asked why a private marital event had been booked under the Transit Authority's community rate. I said it was a friend dinner and paid the difference from my own card. He asked whether the gathering had any connection to a video Nolan recorded at the housewarming. I told him Nolan recorded everything and posted almost nothing. My director said nothing for several seconds. Then he asked me to keep the authority out of my private messaging. Of course, I agreed. Professional boundaries mattered. I called Nolan and asked what video he had shown people. He said only a short clip of the handshake, and only inside the friend group. He said everyone had already been there, so it did not matter. I reminded him that he had started the prediction game. He said he had started a game, not a separation. His voice had lost its appetite for the story. I asked him to bring the wooden chip box to the dinner. He said he would try. Paige still had not answered. I sent her one more message asking whether 11 years of friendship meant she could sit in one chair for an hour. The message showed red that evening. Nothing followed. Her absence looked very small on my phone. I prepared the dinner anyway. I chose Julian's favorite roast chicken because victory did not need to be petty. I ordered lemon cake from the bakery near our first apartment. I printed 2 cards for the center of the table. One said Stee. The other said Go. The red chip rested between them. By the morning of May 31st, every practical failure had been corrected. Bills paid. Lawn cut. Car permit renewed. My mother's organizer delivered by courier. I had not called Julian once. 30 days. No rescue. No surrender. He had underestimated me because quiet men assume noise is weakness. At 7 that evening, I entered the rail depot wearing the blue dress Julian once said made me look impossible to ignore. The hall smelled like old wood and lemon polish. Sunlight crossed the floor in long gold rectangles. Tessa arrived with Omar. Nolan came without the chip box. Lacey brought flowers but placed them near the far end of the table instead of giving them to me. More people entered. Several carried small gift bags. I assumed they had understood the dinner was also a reconciliation. The chair beside mine stayed empty. At 7:58, the depot doors opened. Julian walked in with Amina Rao and 4 people from the health system. He wore a dark suit I had not seen in years. The coastal map was tucked under one arm in a slim frame. He stopped across from me. He ran his thumb once beneath the edge of the watch strap. Then he smiled. Not the careful smile he used when he wanted a room to settle. This one required nothing from me. I touched the stem of my water glass and asked why his co-workers were at our results dinner. Amina answered before he did. She said they were not there for a result. They were there to send their regional director east. My fingers stayed around the glass. Julian placed the framed map on the table. A small brass plate at the bottom carried his name and the words Regional Director of Emergency Readiness. The eastern route he had studied at breakfast was the service area. Amina had called him Director Vale because the appointment was already his. The May 31st date was not only the end of our wager, it was the final day before his position began. The archive boxes had not been props. They were his program files. The people who needed to hear the result were the friends who had watched me confuse care with surrender and the team that had watched him prepare to go. No new facts arrived. The old ones simply stopped accepting my wording. I said Julian had hidden a job decision from his wife. Tessa looked at me and said he had tried to discuss the city before the party, then again on my porch, then once more before the dinner. Her voice was level. The sentence did not bend when I touched it. Julian said he had accepted the role on the condition that he could finish the month here. He had planned to ask me to move with him if our private conversation showed there was still a marriage to move. I asked whether one joke had cancelled 11 years. He looked at the red chip between the two printed cards. Then he said the joke had not cancelled anything. The handshake had answered the question he had been avoiding. Across the room, Nolan took out his phone, deleted the housewarming clip in front of Julian, and said he had turned a marriage into party entertainment. He placed his own red chip beside Julian's glass and left before dinner was served. Paige's chair remained empty. Julian's proposed separation agreement went to a mediator the next morning. I kept the house for 11 weeks, then moved into an apartment near the transit office when the mortgage became too loud for one salary. The services Julian once handled cost me $900 in the first month, not counting the hours I could not purchase back. Tessa and Omar visited him at the coast, while Paige answered my messages only when they concerned returning borrowed things. Nolan stopped inviting me after the depot dinner and never brought the wooden chip box to another party. My director removed me from public trust campaigns and assigned me to internal service notices where my name appeared only in the file history. I had believed Julian's care made him dependent because I never had to see the choice inside it. I thought every repaired hinge, remembered date, and quiet plan proved he would stay wherever I placed him. When he removed those things, his life did not become smaller. Mine became visible. The red chip sits in the top drawer of my desk with Julian's name fading under Nolan's black marker. The side facing up still says go.